So when I say the word cult, what's the first thing that jumps into your mind? For a lot of people, right, it's this movie-like image. Secretive compounds, weird rituals, maybe some wild-eyed charismatic leader. But what if the most powerful, high-control groups don't look like that at all? What if they look a lot more normal, like a passionate political movement, a wellness community, or even a corporate training program? Yeah, let's get into it.
Seriously, take a second. What are you picturing? Is it people in robes, underground bunkers, maybe some doomsday prophecy? It makes sense, because that's what the media always shows us, right? The most extreme, headline-grabbing stuff. And because of that, the word cult has all this baggage. I mean, academics even try to use other terms, like new religious movements, to get around it. But honestly, the label, that's not what's really important here.
Because the real nuts and bolts of how these groups work, it's way more subtle. It's all psychological. They're not always hiding out on the fringes of society. A lot of the time, they're hiding in plain sight. And what's wild is that they all seem to be using the same psychological playbook. Doesn't matter if it's a radical political group from the 70s or some online movement that popped up last year. And this playbook, it's not about forcing people to do things physically. No. It's all about controlling how you think, how you feel, and what you do. It's basically a step-by-step guide for creating a little bubble, a closed world, where the group's reality is the only reality.
So, what's actually in this playbook? Well, we've boiled it down to 4 key tactics you see over and over again. You can think of this as your toolkit for spotting these things. First, they create a black and white us versus them world. Second, they give you the one true answer that explains everything. Third, they build an insulated bubble to keep you in. And fourth, they set up an authority figure or idea that you just can't question. All right, let's break these down.
All right, step 1, creating a world in black and white. You see, the first and maybe most important step is to make the world incredibly simple. Because for control, things like complexity and nuance, they're the enemy.
At the very heart of almost every high-control group is this thing, a binary worldview. It's like putting on a pair of glasses that splits everything, and I mean everything, into a giant battle between pure good and pure evil. It's us versus them, the enlightened versus the corrupt. There's just no middle ground. No gray areas are allowed. And talking to the other side, oh, that's not just a waste of time. It's seen as dangerous, like you'll get contaminated.
And this quote from a Weatherman Underground leaflet back in the day really shows you what this sounds like out in the wild. All around the world, the barricades are going up, and you're either on one side or the other. Listen to those words. Barricades, one side or the other, calling the opposition pigs. This isn't just a political disagreement anymore, is it? This is a holy war. You're either with us, a freedom fighter, or you're the enemy. And that kind of thinking, well, it makes compromise completely impossible.
So how do they actually enforce this kind of purity? Well, they've got a few key tools. They use loaded language, words designed to stop you from thinking critically. They demand total, absolute ideological purity. And then there's this really intense tactic, public confession sessions. Some groups call it criticism/self-criticism. Imagine being in a room where you're forced to stand up and confess any thought you had that didn't perfectly align with the group's ideas. It's brutal. It reinforces these impossible standards and makes everyone totally dependent on the group for their self-worth.
Okay, moving on to the second part of the playbook, the one true answer. Because once you've spit the world into good and evil, you gotta have a belief system that explains absolutely everything.
A psychiatrist named Robert J. Lifton had a great term for this: ideological totalism. It's basically an ideology that claims to have an answer for everything, from why the world is the way it is, all the way down to who you should be friends with. The group's beliefs are treated like a sacred science, the ultimate truth. And questioning it, that's not just being curious or skeptical. Oh no, it's treated like heresy.
And to protect this sacred science, the group has to enforce another one of Lifton's concepts, doctrine over person. This is a huge one. It means if your own life experience, your own memories, don't fit the ideology, then your memories are wrong. You have to twist them, reinterpret them, maybe even throw them out entirely so that they fit the group's story. Your own life becomes less real than the narrative the group is pushing.
And right here, this is one of the biggest red flags separating a healthy social movement from a political cult. I mean, think about someone like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He was all about dialogue, even with his critics. He believed in persuasion. Now compare that to a group like the Weatherman Underground. They wouldn't even debate their opponents. They just called them names like lackeys of the imperialists. See the difference? One is trying to open minds, and the other is trying to slam them shut.
Okay, so let's recap. You've got a black and white world, you've got the one true ideology to explain it all. So what's next? Well, you have to build a wall around it. You've got to protect it. Lifton called this milieu control, which is basically a fancy way of saying controlling the environment. You have to build a bubble around your members. The group starts to manage everything: what you read, who you talk to, what news you see. The goal is simple: make the group's reality the only reality you experience. If they can control all the information going in, then their ideology never ever gets challenged. And this usually starts by painting everyone outside the bubble, especially your family and old friends, as a bad influence or even an enemy. You see it in groups like the FLDS, where they live in extreme isolation. But you also saw it with political groups. Mark Rudd, who is in the Weathermen Underground, wrote about how agonizing this was. He said, "I was paying them back for all the years of care and sacrifice by completely turning my back on them. I knew that I might never see them again." Just, wow, that's the price you have to pay to get inside that bubble.
And for our fourth and final tactic, every one of these closed systems needs a boss, an enforcer, someone or something that has the final say on what's true.
Yeah, and when you look at the psychology of these leaders, researchers often talk about something called the dark triad of personality traits. First, you have narcissism. That's the massive ego, the need to be adored. Then there's Machiavellianism. That's the cunning, manipulative, the ends justify the means thinking. And finally, psychopathy, and that's the scary one. A total lack of empathy, the ability to use and abuse people without feeling a shred of guilt.
I mean, Charles Manson is the textbook example of the psychopathic leader, right? He had this surface-level charm, but underneath it was a complete and utter disregard for other human beings. The only reason he could manipulate his followers so effectively is because he simply didn't have that little voice inside, that empathy, that stops the rest of us from doing horrible things.
And then you have someone like Warren Jeffs from the FLDS who is just a perfect storm of narcissism. His whole authority was built on one massive grandiose claim, that he was a prophet who spoke directly for God. And that divine right gave him the excuse to control every single aspect of his followers' lives, who they married, their finances, their salvation, everything.
But, and this is a really important point, you don't always need one single charismatic person at the top. Sometimes the ideology itself becomes the leader. A sacred book or the writings of a few key thinkers can become the thing that nobody is allowed to question. The Weathermen Underground is a good example. A lot of their cult-like behaviors started before a clear leader even emerged. The truth of their doctrine was the real authority.
So we've gone through the playbook, we've seen how these groups operate, but that leaves the biggest question of all, right? Why? Why on earth would any smart, normal person get sucked into one of these worlds?
Well, the data gives us a pretty big clue. Look at this. Almost 60% of people who join these groups do it between the ages of 18 and 28. That's not an accident. Think about that time in your life. You're leaving home, starting college or a new job, figuring out who you are. Researchers call it situational vulnerability. It's basically a time when you're looking for answers, and you're way more open to big, new ideas.
And that vulnerability gets a massive amplifier from a very modern problem: loneliness. A recent Gallup poll found that 39% of college students felt lonely on any given day. 39%! That is an incredible number of people who feel disconnected and are just looking for a place to belong.
And that, right there, is the final piece of the puzzle. These groups are so successful because they offer a potent cocktail that satisfies our deepest human needs. Think about it. Our world can feel chaotic and lonely. They offer community. It can feel pointless. They offer purpose. It's full of confusing questions. They offer the sweet, simple relief of certainty. And they reel you in with a tactic called love bombing, just overwhelming you with attention and affection until you feel like you finally come home.
So you can see how the line between a really passionate movement and a dangerous high-control group can get pretty blurry. But now you have the playbook. You know the 4 key tactics to look for: the black and white thinking, the one-size-fits-all ideology, the bubble of isolation, and the authority you can't question. And knowing that, it leaves us all with a pretty tough question. When you look at the world around you, where do you draw the line?